Warning, the following video contains brief mentions of violence, murder, child neglect, corruption, Jeffrey Bezos, psychological manipulation, human experimentation, and worst of all, cringe. Viewer discretion is advised. Hey guys, I'm V for Verbatim, and I somehow got graphite on the inside of my hand. Seriously, this ain't a joke, people. There's more pencil on me than the actual drawing. The curse of being left-handed. Anyway, we're doing another story and character revision today with a set of 9 more villains. If you haven't seen my last video, you might want to watch that by the way. I'm basically taking characters I made as far back as elementary school and kind of modifying them a little. So I'm taking this as an exercise of creativity, sort of. I'm kind of influenced by a lot of media subconsciously though, so it's not entirely creative. But we can't really meander for this one, so strap in because we've got quite a bit to discuss with this one. So like I said in the last video, the story these characters are part of is called Chicago 2020. It's about 6 super siblings called the Refraction Force or the Astral Family. They fight crime with the power of rainbows and stuff, at least at the beginning, where the last set of villain redesigns came into play. For this set, we're delving into the latter half of these heroes' lives, so more exposition I guess. The team kind of went their separate ways for a few years before reuniting in Chicago to fight crime for a little bit longer, before they were, slaughtered like pigs as teenagers, as I mentioned before. The period of time they spent alone was mostly for them to grow as individuals, but for the final part of their story, it's more about how, because they were heroes from the age of 4, they became dysfunctional due to high expectations they weren't mentally prepared for. Team leadership at this point switched over from Lucas, our adventurous main lead, to Jack's hot-headed free spirit, who became surprisingly mature in his own way. Lucas goes through what I would describe as protagonist withdrawal, struggling to move on because the only life he'd ever known was as a protagonist leader Mary Sue. They all fall short of each other in different ways. They struggle to vocalize their issues, and the lack of Sebastian Farnsworth in their lives, that comforting father figure, leaves them with no one to turn to except Jackson, who has to hold the team together until they inevitably unravel. The villains for this section of the story are a reflection of their desires to be free of their occupation and live the lives they never could, and it ties into the legacy they left behind after their deaths. So let's look over the villains they face during this oddly psychological period of the Astrals' lives. Honestly, better than the last set by a considerable margin. We've got 10 characters this time around. Clover 55, a defective droid clone person with a knife. She's overshadowed by her pod sibling from another story. Then we have the drum majors. Literally just drum majors. Their uniforms are alright, but since I have a little experience with marching band now, I think I could do something really fun with them. Another duo, the twins. They're siblings that can access the spirit world, with the sister actually being a ghost herself that possesses her brother to use her abilities. It's why they both have the same expression. We also have Wasp and Cobra. They were rejected designs for child experiments, but I redrew them as more of a separate thing here. Wasp is actually the younger sister of a character called Bee, who is one of those child experiments. She has guns, I guess, and a bee-themed outfit. Cobra's kind of similar, but he's missing his hands and has swords instead. Princess Yue's a bird creature with flowers for hands. She rules a planet called Hendron, or at least her species on the planet, and she has no personality. Lovely. Lastly, we have Luken and Rey, also called Time and Mind Master. I've drawn these characters a dozen times at this point, and these are the worst versions by far. I would go over their stories, but there's a lot of story to cover for these guys that might have to wait for another video. So yeah, another set of villains, a lot more variety, a little bit of story to work off of. Since I'm recording this after the fact, I can assure you that these guys look loads better than the first redraw video. Hopefully you guys enjoy, and remember to stay until the very end to see a before and after for the characters, as well as their new names. For this one, the focus of each character is going to be more for the purpose of expanding this universe and exposure to some pretty outlandish stuff. There are aliens, clones, characters that can dimension hop, the spirit world, and we're going to be streamlining some of those ideas here today, as well as trying out some new things if you guys don't mind. This also may have been apparent by how much these guys have going on in their designs, but these 10 characters are some of my favorite minor villain designs. I put a lot of heart and soul into some of their redraws. Those that have a little bit more care put into them will probably be more obvious after about 10 seconds of me drawing them out. Actually, it's really the detail and clarity of the face that gives my favorites away. Like I mentioned before, these characters are meant to expose the subconscious desires of the hero team they fight. and I'm going to try to redesign the characters with different versions of that idea in mind here, so that they're not all going to be symbolic of the freedom the Astrals can never have. That idea was already made redundant in the last redraw, and admittedly, a lot of superhero narratives we see today. And then lastly, these characters will be delving into slightly darker territory than the first set of characters, as I've warned you. These characters more often than not aim to kill or worse. Consider Hot Dog Man from the first video the tip of the iceberg for what the super sextuplets face later on. So first we have Luken, later the leader of the Masters of Mayhem. His character glow up was a little bit more recent, so this was mostly a fine-tuning for his design. A little background on him here. He was once a child that lived alone before being killed by an angry mob and becoming a new entity, a 1,000-year-old being with light powers of a deity, apathy of a demon, and all his original memories. There's a lot more to it, but I've got to summarize here. That was all centuries before this story, though. In that time, he became a gun for hire that took down political leaders without a second thought, and he ends up in Chicago when he's asked by a longtime client to make the Refraction Force's life hell. Luken is a foil to Lucas, one of the Refraction Force members, again, the leader character. They both have light powers originally, and their personalities, at least in the revised story, are opposites. Luken's kind of lazy and stoic most of the time, and he's a free-range parent to a character above him, Rey. Meanwhile, Lucas is really wound up. He can't let his siblings do anything without offering advice or interfering, and he micromanages every interaction they have with each other. Luken is that desire Lucas has to fully relax, but he's incapable of doing so because he was raised to think that he had to be a hero and a leader 24/7. For his redraw, I was mostly experimenting with his appearance like I usually do with him. On his sleeves he has patches representing both the sun and moon, which were the names of the entities that fused with him. I gave him gloves because they looked kind of cool. His face came out weirdly anime-esque, something I'm not entirely against, but it makes the rest of the drawing look extra terrible and stiff. Although I was able to incorporate a lot of hourglass imagery in way more places than I expected. Side note, Luken's hair is a connection to his power, light. Light as a physical element appears as yellow crystals in this story, so his hair is blonde to emphasize his connection to the element. I do this with a lot of elements of the universe and their wielders, so keep that in mind if you see a lot of gingers associated with fire, or blondes with light powers. Rey, Reagan, or Mindmaster was released from a mental hospital by Luken because Luken's just extra like that. He saw Rey's value as a sidekick after the guy slaughtered every patient and staff member in the hospital. So yeah, lots of violence, a lot of insanity obviously. He's definitely a product of my freshman year. His initial power allows him to knock out his opponents by snapping his fingers, which is a struggle for him since he can't snap his fingers all that well. His success rate as a result varies. He was locked up in the place since he was 10 years old because his parents didn't really want to deal with him. So yes, he was odd before, possibly neurotypical due to his antisocial behavior and obsession with certain objects, but his isolation and hospital's lack of acceptance for his mindset drove him mad. He really is a sweetheart though. He loves band-aids and sticking them to people he cares about, he likes stuffed animals, and when he meets a hero named Robin way later on, he becomes obsessed with her and does everything he can think of to make her like him. That's a whole separate story though. Here I drew him before he got an official uniform more like Luken's, since he doesn't really have one until the end of the Refraction Force's run. This is maybe the second or third time I've drawn a straitjacket, and this time I actually used reference images. I made his clothing, especially the jacket, a little baggier. Like Tora from the other redraw, my goal for him was to make him cuddly, which is the most dangerous thing about him. One wrong step with him and he'd be stabbing you instead of hugging you. Rey's power, which is mind-related, is associated with the color orange, so to emphasize his connection to the element, his messed up hair would be red here. Overall, I think I finally captured all of Rey's quirkiness and well-meaning energy here. This newest version of Rey just really feels like an accomplishment to me, and the excitement at having done so well with him, at least in my opinion, fueled me throughout the other drawings. Next for Cobra, originally listed as Experiment Gone Wrong. Pretty self-explanatory. There's this entrepreneur, billionaire type character that has 26 weaponized children he experimented on. He was created before I knew about Jeffrey Bezos, but he's basically just Jeffrey Bezos. He's the closest thing I have to a main antagonist though, so completely deleting him would unravel a lot. Cobra was one of them originally until they were replaced in the final lineup. I think I forgot they were even a character, to be honest, and for this revision she's going to be more independent of her origins. She's friends with Wasp, firstly, and the two of them took up part-time jobs as kids to save up money for school. Wasp at an old-fashioned candy store, and Cobra as a chemist's intern at an organization called Legacy. She ends up losing her hands in a workplace accident, and bitter about her ruined life, she steals untested substances from her employer and uses them to try to regrow her arms. The substance had gone through several trials as a potential prescription to activate stem cells, and it hadn't worked very well because metallic shards would grow in the place of the lost limbs of the test subjects instead of actual limbs. The same happened to Cobra, and that's basically how she happened. I made her really short and very striped to create the same intended connection with snakes from her previous drawing, but I tried to clean it up a bit, make it clear where things started and ended anatomy-wise, and just generally redesigned her face to be a little bit more angular. The harsher lines are meant to emphasize that she's not someone that you can really reason with. Not my favorite, but I think she's fine for a minor character. Princess Yue is next. Her name needs to go, but basically her species is from a planet called Hendron, which is made up of many different forests and oceans, kind of like our planet but more biologically diverse. Princess Yue was to be the ruler of the planet, a plant-bird hybrid thing that could create flowers with her hands. That's a lot of ideas, not many good ones, but we can work with this. I established way too many different independent Hendronian leaders in my stories. There was this guy called King Juris, Commander Zoltro, Commanders Tyro and Hendro. God, the names! For the sake of my sanity, Hendron will be broken up into 4 states, one for each ruler and 2 of the commanders feuding over one state. Instead of being a princess, Yue was an authoritarian dictator that sought to claim the other states of Hendron as her own by using her decaying powers to destroy their lands and starve their people. Her land was taken from her by King Juris during a military coup, so she went to Earth to claim the planet as a new Hendronian state. Strangely political? Yes. Cringy? Definitely. Do I love it anyway? Another easy yes. I mostly just changed proportions, made her a little less human, and I got weirdly experimental with eyelashes today. I made her headdress look a little like a truffula tree. I varied up line width for her robe things. I used feathers or leaves or something in her design. I honestly don't remember. I'm bad at this if you couldn't tell. I went through a couple of ideas for eyes before deciding that the face looked like a mask more than anything, so I just gave her solid black eyes to reflect the emptiness I felt inside for her. I just didn't have many ideas for her, honestly. I kind of scrapped the whole half plants thing. It didn't really work with her aesthetic, so I just gave her derpy little wings instead. Shading got pretty sloppy, as you can probably tell. I think a few more changes to her design and story could definitely benefit her. But in general, I'm just not really jazzed about her as a whole, because I mostly just stuck too closely to her original design, I think. 2 misses in a row. Hopefully this next one's a little bit more interesting. Next, let's move on to Clova 55. She was a pretty boring character, just a defective clone that left her hive mind society to do evil stuff, I guess. Her skin was blue though, and I don't know why, but I immediately thought of Rama, a warrior and the reincarnation of a Hindu god called Vishnu. I was going to do this thing where the Clova were actually a space religious group with access to the death realm, but then I realized that I have a species exactly like that, right down to the blue skin and everything. Instead, I went a more conventional route with this revision. Clova is an organization that conducts genetic experiments, taking the best pieces of each species to create a new superior life form after the universe falls to a prophesized Armageddon. Clova 55, or Experiment 55, is modeled after the Earth hero Rama, and given the abilities of a plethora of species. Mostly their strength, speed, and long lifespan. In fact, many of the experiments will resemble Earth heroes, which makes the upcoming video with another one of his fellow clones a much more exciting prospect. Back to this video though, Clova 55 is still defective in this version. He was corrupted by an outside force, he escaped, and he came to Earth since he was also programmed with the stories told about Rama in his brain. He devastated regions of Earth only to save it right after, all to receive the glory and worship from his victims. And he did the same in Chicago until our main team of heroes put a stop to it, and did a lot of self-reflection. The 3 brothers, Matthew, Lucas, and Jackson, worry that if they don't constantly watch themselves, they may use their powers to destroy. Similarly, sisters Memori, Charlie, and Caroline fear that they could use their powers to manipulate people. Clova here is their underlying fear of prowess corrupting their intentions. I also did quite a bit of research for this design. Rama is a form of Vishnu, god of protection, and part of the trinity of main Hindu gods. He is often seen carrying a discus, lotus, mace, and a conch shell, among other things. I took those basic shapes and incorporated them in various places. I just wanted it to be clear that while this is Rama, him being corrupted has affected his intentions and personality. So he's arrogant, lustful for power, but also possesses a strength and grace to him that Rama has, making it believable for people to trust him. I took elements from images of Rama and darkened them to give him that effect of corruption in his clothing. This isn't really related, but I tend to give characters clothes I would wear or wish I could wear. I like conservative and comfortable, and Clova here is wearing the exact sort of thing I would kill to wear every day. I did some touch-ups, added little lines on his sword to show corruption physics, and I drew him above a flower because Vishnu is often drawn standing on a lotus. Overall, Clova looks decent, has an actual story now, and his character gave me an opportunity to learn a little bit more about Hinduism. All in all, a fun character to revisit. Now for the twins, one of the best glow-ups here actually. I actually understand what a Yurei is now, so I think I can make a character that better reflects the concept. Yurei are typically spirits with unfinished business. In media, they're often depicted as women who have been murdered or otherwise wronged in life by someone close to them. They are often malevolent spirits that seek out vengeance against the living in some way. They're not to be confused with Ryu, Japanese dragons, or yokai, which are more similar to cryptids or monsters, but can be the result of some kind of possession. Yonaki Ishi, for example, are stones or boulders that cry at night because they are possessed by someone that died near them. That explanation out of the way, here's a rough outline of the new twin story. The brother studied Yurei for most of his life as a historian of sorts. He was so engrossed and passionate about his work because his sister had died in his youth, and he wanted to find a way to reach her. To do so, he found ancient scrolls detailing a ritual to revive the dead. Through the ritual, he learned that his sister was in fact a Yurei that had been following him for years because he was the one that killed her as a child, in a memory he suppressed to protect himself. In a ghostly form strengthened by the ritual, she possessed his body and forced him to use his Yurei knowledge to collect ghosts and use them against anyone that crossed them. Her ultimate goal is to open up the spirit world, or the death realm, so that the dead can take the world of the living. While these characters aren't connected to the main theme of the hero's story, their background has a lot of similarities to the ultimate fate of one of the astrals. I used their story as an introduction to the idea of possession and sibling betrayal that comes into play at the very end of the astral family story. For this set of characters, I also wanted to make it a clearer fusion of their bodies. The brother is kind of gone at this point, so his skin would just be replaced with blackened butterflies in his fully realized form. Here, though, he's just stiff like a puppet. He's dressed in a trench coat kind of thing you'd see those detectives types wearing. He's the man of mystery, basically. I struggled with the eyes for a while since I wanted the eyes to mirror his sister's, but it didn't really look right. I ended up just going with opaque glasses to hide his eyes. I gave him a few little details that are either hard to see or just look bad. He carries a butterfly necklace that belonged to his sister, and he has butterfly-shaped buttons on his coat that look really bad. Butterflies are associated with spirits in Japanese culture, so I used it here to represent the spirit and influence of his sister. I also made his sister a lot less human than before. Her hands hang over her brother in the way Yurei typically hold out their hands, and her eyes are like lamplight across her lifeless brother. Her hair is also meant to flow around her brother like it's wrapping around him to envelop him. I stuck a knife in her head, mostly because I didn't like the way her hair was looking on the other side of the big melon head, but I did something interesting with it. I made the blood coming out of the wound sort of float above the mark. If you've ever seen The Devil's Backbone, it's kind of a nod to the ghost from that movie. And finally, I added little butterflies on her head. She has the ability to create openings from the death realm to the living realm, and I imagine that when she uses these abilities, they take the form of butterflies to the eye of the living. These characters look way more chilling, but in a subdued way compared to Hot Dog Man. They're definitely a more imposing threat, at least. Now for first, the name and design style is going to change back to the original, since I'm going back to the basics with her. So we're going back to a bumblebee/bee theme. For her rewrites, though, Wasp works at a vintage-style candy store and is friends with Cobra. Now she'd probably just be enjoying life, making money nickel by nickel, and Cobra just chops her arm off. Hear me out, though. I kind of see them as a thing. I can't tell if it's romantic or platonic right now, but they're always there for each other, even if one of them steals chemicals to grow back sword arms. Cobra would worry that Wasp wouldn't stay with her, though, so she'd take off one of her arms and stage it as an accident. Cobra obviously wouldn't be very helpful in a situation where her partner's bleeding out, so she'd just give Wasp chemicals to fix her, since it worked out so well for her. Her arm gets fixed, she loses her job, and to make a living for her and her partner after they're cast out from society, she robs candy stores exclusively as revenge to them for firing her. Because despite Cobra chopping off her arm, Wasp sticks with her. This possibly toxic relationship is already my favorite of this group, and I tied it back to the heroes and how they view their future. They want to experience the craziness of relationships, that terrible part-time job, that ruthless manager, but they can't really do that because of their commitment to serving people. These two toxic lovers get to experience every twist and turn their relationship takes them down. Something that Jackson especially wishes he could have. Story aside, let's talk design. Wasp is a little bit more poised than Cobra. She's energetic, a little mischievous, and she can be a bit bitter towards people who hurt her or Cobra. Here, I gave her a more relaxed pose since she's kind of figured out how to use her arm effectively. She conceals her arm in its many points, inside of a gumball machine-shaped weapon that's filled with honey. She uses the weapon and the honey to pin her opponents. Unlike the original design, I took a lot of inspiration from her workplace, vintage candy stores. The striped apron definitely gave me bee vibes, so I included that as well as the little cap thing that's also part of the uniform. There's also stripes along her legs to further emphasize the bee, and with that I started shading. For these last few I attempted cell shading, and I'm not very good at it, but it fit the cartoony look I was going for. It definitely made her hair look extra bee-ish. Overall, she turned out way better than I expected going in, given I basically had to remake the character. Lastly, we have the drum majors. After having been in the band class for 7 years and doing marching band for a bit, I think it's safe to say I know band kids. So for these guys, I'm going to say they're not entirely evil, but more of an inconvenience. Their powers are simple enough. They can manipulate the volume of people, animals, and objects, a power they use on the astrals to screw with them. They're from 2 well-renowned high school marching bands in the Chicago area and are bitter rivals. While they don't directly attack the astrals or commit any crimes, they're an obstacle to the astrals in terms of press coverage, which becomes a valuable currency once they arrive in Chicago. Anytime the astrals defeat a villain or put someone behind bars, the drum majors just step in with their own achievements and distract the press by flaunting it. Here's an example. The astrals uncovered the Chicago Strangler's identity, but instead of having their important discovery covered on the news, these 2 drum major idiots create an entire show in memory of the Chicago Strangler's victims, and they're covered instead. As for individual personalities, the guy who I'll tentatively be calling Philip is a classic trumpet player. Kind of loud, the kind of guy that laughs at his own jokes, and like any band kid, socially awkward outside of a band context. I'd say he's a musical prodigy sophomore at a rich school, but he flaunts his skill and thinks he's single-handedly holding his band program together with his skills. He's an accomplice to the girl I'm going to be calling Janet for now. She's a more reserved French horn, saxophone, and piccolo player. While she's a junior and the brains behind their schemes, she acts innocent when confronted to protect herself. She and her band are a tightly knit group of people that push themselves harder than Philip's band and are generally more ambitious. Despite working together to steal the spotlight from the astrals, they hate each other with a passion. They'd be this off-screen tournament arc situation just fighting to win awards at assessments and competitions and talking about that stuff when they are on screen. Just pointing out their competitors' flaws, exactly the sort of stuff you'd see from super competitive nerds. But outside of the band environment, they'd be oddly cordial and they'd plan to go to the same college together, getting college recommendations and working part-time together, or something super sweet and wholesome like that. I was thinking of making it a rivals to lovers thing, but as a background distractor and comedic duo, I figured that they had enough going on. Anyway, for their uniforms, I took elements of the original designs, but I also used a few more reference images. I drew a plume on Janet's hat since they're a typical part of any marching band uniform. But I made it a side plume since those are just a little bit cooler in my opinion. Janet also carries a conductor's stick like a sword. It's a little bit more hostile than just using her hands like most drum majors do, which works to make her look a little bit more intimidating. Philip, by contrast, has a lot going on in his uniform. I imagine in an attempt to seem more intimidating and decorated. I made the one sash look like a keyboard because music. And yeah, not much to him. I give him pimples and braces since I don't tend to draw those kinds of imperfections in my characters. I just figured branching out might be a good idea. Oh, and their connection to the theme of the series is the fact that they're high schoolers with superpowers, living relatively normal lives. And that's pretty much it for these guys. While their designs aren't as cool anymore, in my opinion, I think their function as a less ill-meaning antagonist duo makes things with the heroes a little less bleak. So here we are at the end of the video once again. While we watch past me spend several extra minutes doing those few finishing touches, I want to touch on the idea of the multiverse crystals. It's a cringy name and I'm going to change it, but the gist of it is that, like the Infinity Stones, the universe and its natural forces were concentrated into 21 unique elements. They're sometimes harnessed through physical crystals/artifacts, or an individual may have a natural connection to the element, otherwise known as a superpower, ability, quirk, etc. In fact, the dimension the characters live in is overlapped by other dimensions, areas on different planes of existence where the elements are originally from. and every element falls under one of 8 colors when it takes on a physical multiverse crystal. The Refraction Force can wield 12, 13 of them. I forget sometimes. But anyway, through these last few villains, I've been gradually introducing you guys to those elements, the source of their abilities. Sebastian Farnsworth is energy, being a literal star and all. Tectonic is manipulation, Taurus just herself, Tsunami's water, Hot Dog Man, and Snapshot are both mind, and the children are powerless except for Cataclysm, who is somewhat connected to fire. As for this video, Luken is light, Rey's connection is time-based, Cobra and Wasp are powerless, Yue's decay, Rama doesn't have any base powers, the twins are death, and the drum majors are silence. Their powers fall under the categories of these elements, but others with different powers may fall under the same category for different reasons. Overall, that's how abilities work in this world. But the idea is also up for revision, especially the names of these things, my god. Looks like I just finished, so with these characters finally complete, let's see how we did. These characters are... Another day, another set of redraws done. That makes 19 of over 720 characters redrawn, which is about 3%. I won't be doing every character, some of them were just one-off characters for no reason, but this is going to be a bunch of episodes, some with less redraws in them than others. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this episode. Be sure to like and subscribe if you feel like it, and be on the lookout for that final video for story number 1. This is V for Verbatim signing off until the next video. Take care, guys.